rolled over and so he knocks over the stage.
Oh man. I know
Rolling on the ground.
it's easy for me to preach. It's so interesting, like as far as testimony, I'm like, I don't even know if I'm gonna use this. I feel like I'm gonna be doing this a lot. I don't know, maybe I could use it. Alright. I don't know why, to some extent I'm somewhat nervous. It's kind of
I know.
weird for me.
Alright, dude.
Alright.
It's recording.
Recording? Good.
It's been recording.
Alright, well, to begin with, I want to start by talking about my background. And obviously I'm Hispanic, and I was raised in a godly Christian home by some very humble and godly parents, and they really have influenced my life amazingly. And by the time I was 7 years old, I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. I came to realize that I was made for a greater purpose, and thank God for my parents and their discipleship. And it got me to a point where by the time I was 7 and I got saved, I actually began to preach in a lot of kids events. So, I mean, just imagine little Jamie walking around preaching. So, it was a tremendous gift, though. And throughout that time, God began to mold me as a leader. And it was actually incredible to see at a young age how God can use such a young person. I saw how my parents would continue to keep me in prayer. And it was just a phenomenal experience. So, by the time I was 11 years old, I went to a Christian school, Bible Baptist Christian Academy, and that's where I learned about theology. Now, we wouldn't call it theology over there, but in essence, that's what I was learning. And throughout that time, I actually developed to have an interest for music. I love music as a pianist. That was a big thing. My dad was a pianist and a guitarist, so that same year, I began to just practice, began to learn, and by the age of 12, began to minister through the music at my church. So it was a great time. Now, at the age of 14, there was a lot of things going on in my church. There was a lot of my family members were huge leaders within the church, but many of them began to backslide, and a lot of hard times began to hit the church, and the youth group, the ministry began to crumble. At one time, it had flourished. We had many youth, but it began to crumble. So I remember at the age of 14, God began to really open my eyes to a lot of things in life that I didn't realize at first. At first I was like, God, yeah, I want to work in the church ministry, but at that point they had said, Jamie, we want you to be the head guy of the youth ministry at that point. 14 years old, head of the youth ministry. And I'm like, what? No. Are you kidding? Like, I'm only 14 years old, I have no idea where I'm headed, with all of this. And I remember one day I was my parents, they were driving, and I was in the back seat, and I remember just looking out the window, and I began to just think about the youth and think about, what was going on in my life. And at that moment, God began to speak to my spirit, and I began to realize that God was calling me to be a young leader in my generation. And that was a huge thing. It wasn't one of those altar calls, where, the preacher's preaching a message that convicts your soul. But it was more like, I was just sitting there, and just in that quiet moment as we were driving, God spoke to my heart as a leader. And it was actually a very impactful time in my life. And so then from that age, from 14 up till I graduated, I was a spiritual leader in my church, and that was a big influence. God began to use me to be somewhat of a mentor to many people and an accountability partner. And in my high school at that time, God had really used me to be a brother. I knew everyone. Small Christian school. By the time I graduated with a class of 7, and it was a very small school, but I knew everyone, and it was incredible to see where God allowed me to influence many lives. Now, at my last 2 years of high school, though, those are one of those years where women your eyes are opened to the beauty of females. I'll be realistic. And 2 months into my junior year, I engaged into a relationship with a young lady. And throughout that time, I began to idolize her, and that's when my walk with the Lord began to really get shaken up. I became very distant, with my walk with God. But throughout that time, though, God began to reveal to me, though, the importance of having a true relationship with Him. And so it really impacted not just my life in a bad way, but also the life of actually a lot of my friends who I was an influence to in my high school. So glory be to God, though. He broke us up 2 months before graduation. He literally tore us apart. At the same time, I got accepted here at LBC, so that was pretty exciting. I had mixed emotions. But throughout that time, God began to open my eyes, understanding, I was called for a reason. I'm called for a purpose, for a greater purpose, and the importance of that responsibility that I have to pursue it. So that summer, God began to prepare me through the book of Daniel as I was coming here to college, and it was a great experience. So just to wrap it up here, just to wrap up my last few years here at LBC, my freshman year was a year of identity. I come from a conservative Pentecostal background, and God has blessed me a lot, I've learned a lot, but the thing was, I didn't understand exactly what I believed and why I believed it. That was a huge thing, it was a crisis coming here. I remember freshman year coming in, and I was like, oh my gosh, all these people have it together, but I'm here like, nah. Why do I believe this? You know? But the thing is, it was about that time that God began to test me and says, I've called you to study my word. And so that was my freshman year, and then last year was a year of brokenness, where by that point, I knew where I was going in ministry. You know, I was like, yes, Lord, I'm going. Youth ministry, worship ministry, I'm going in. But then that's when God was like, back off, because you're not doing it for the right reasons. You have great intentions, but without me being at the center of it, you can't do anything. And then God had to break me. So now I'm here, my junior year. God's allowed me to start a worship team at my church, and just gleaning a lot here as far as theology, but ministry and also music. So that's a little bit of my life story. So thanks for listening. How many minutes was that?